campaign going for a sound system at the chapel. So, it's considered launched, but I'm not giving the first pledge. So, it's been a full day already. We began this morning with the ELCA malaria campaign, and as you know, Southwest California Synod is one of the pilot synods that led the way to our $50 million malaria campaign in support of our doing malaria work. And so we have about 40 that have already given gifts and are part of 3 congregations especially, but not only. And I thank you and all those who are coming, now that I have a little chance. The Sorensen Challenge, Arnie and Ruth Sorensen are college grads from the ELCA network of schools. Arnie on March 31st will become the president and CEO, he's already president and CEO of the Marriott Corporation, the first non-Marriott, non-Mormon, good ELCA person to handle the corporation. So he and Ruth have given a challenge grant for colleges and campus ministries to come up with creative ideas to raise malaria. So we have been assured that there will be a great creative proposal from CLU. So, and this afternoon I was sitting here with pizza and great students that they promised me they wouldn't come back. And now you can be like the 5 bishops that sat in the front row when I was at TLU once, and they called me down just before the lecture, and they said, we've decided we'll tug on our ear every time we hear you say something new. Okay, all you active additions, you can know what that's like, right? On the road, so you can tug on your ear. So I do see this as a conversation, particularly about one of my favorite topics, and that's the Lutheran case for the vocation of higher education. And I will probably only be telling you things you already know, and you know even more than I. That's why I will be enriched by the conversation. My colleagues in Chicago, when I get a little heavy laden with the administrative role of being president and CEO of this church and not just presiding bishop, they always say, why don't you get on a campus? You're so much more fun to be around when you come back from the campus business. And we were just saying, I guess it's been until 2007, that was last year, for Founders Day. Is that what it's called? Yeah. But it feels like more recently. When I go to the Best Western here and feel like I have my own room because it's been so often that I know I've been back. But I so appreciate what you are doing as California Lutheran University. Having had Howie come on our staff for a while, he embodies the passion for this place. It tells creativity in a compelling way, and so that has kept me informed. But just to see the growth of this university academically and your diversity, the way that you're taking advantage of the fiscal plight of the state of California, and it's harvesting up amazing things, the way you were essentially given a business school, I mean, it just is not a stretch or that. But wasn't there another school that came on campus? Economic research, thank you. I'll look to you from now on to bail me out. So, it wasn't new because I couldn't remember it, so that's really true. And recently I was in New Orleans for the Youth Extravaganza, which I said was a veiled PR thing for CLU, the way that Scott and Melissa were there front and center, and so many of your students, and the chair of the board of the Youth Network is the pastor from Ascension, Larry Wagner. So you are not only serving youth and young adults at CLU, but you are serving the whole church, and for that I give thanks. So a little bit of reflection about this whole idea of vocation and higher education. And the way I like to think about it is that colleges and universities have a two-sided. There is a vocation for Lutheran higher education, and part of that vocation is to prepare people for their vocations. But I don't think of the case for the vocation of Lutherans in higher education as being singularly and only their vocations, their many callings. And so I want to talk a little bit about the latter first. Years done what Luther did almost 500 years ago, and that's he rediscovered understanding of vocation and calling, and really in a context where it had been reduced, I think, to a sense of holy calling, clerical calling, calling to serve the church. And Luther, as you know, began to open that up. And with his understanding of calling or stand or office in 4 arenas of our life. The life of family and friends is one place where God calls us and places us to live out purpose and passion that God comes to us in the waters of baptism and opens us up in the freedom of the gospel for. Well, that was a long sentence. Could you repeat that? Always tempting to active additions that think complexly. Well, never mind. Second, the stand office is our engagement in the world. Sometimes talked about community or our vocation as citizens. The life of the baptized lived in the world and community. Third is really, I don't think I had this in the right order, Luther, but our vocation in the church, the community of the baptized, our vocation as persons of faith, and then our vocation as daily work, which we often think of as our careers or jobs. Well, what a rich opening up of how a college exists to prepare students for their calling, their stand in those various offices. In a richer sense, particularly for high in a liberal arts tradition, of that kind of understanding of why we engage in this work, in this vocation. But that's, I think, all very familiar to you. Let me talk a little bit about how I understand the Lutheran case for a vocation in higher education. I mean, I ask the question, what is the vocation of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America? We like to talk about mission these days. It gets used so much, everything's mission speak. So sometimes I kind of avoid mission speak and try to go back to vocation, because I think vocation brings together identity and purpose. And mission purpose, but the words become so slip over us. So I think we have a vocation as Lutherans, a calling, grounded in our theological self-understanding in the service of the gospel, but also lived out in the world. And part of our vocation is to be engaged in education. It's part of our calling, it's part of our understanding of being part of the body of Christ. And in that, not only in universities and colleges, but particularly so, I think we have a vocation to nurture, not only in students, but faculty and staff and all that we come in contact with, an unquenchable curiosity about faith and life in a culture that's dominated by an insatiable appetite for possessions and power and position. Should I do that again, or you're with me? So I think we have a calling as an expression of faith, as part of our baptismal calling, an unquenchable curiosity about faith and life in a culture dominated by an insatiable appetite for power, prestige, position, possessions, you know, alliteration, P's. This is not an easy culture to nurture that sense of an unquenchable curiosity about faith and life. In many respects, I think this is a very anti-intellectual, anti-curious culture. And she just goes crazy. She teaches both high school and college. She goes crazy with the whole orientation towards standardized testing and performance measured by testing. And even as a math teacher, she sees, sorry, delete that, that's my daughter, delete that tweet. But, I mean, she sees math as a place you nurture curiosity. That mathematics opens up about the world, but then is driven to productivity, to measurability. It just mitigates against what she was nurtured at a Lutheran college to be about in her vocation of teaching. So we need each other to persevere in this countercultural move. If you've ever heard me, you've probably heard me quote, so we do this now, Joseph Sittler, who said when he was writing about grace, he said, what I'm appealing for is an understanding of grace that has beneath it the magnitude of the doctrine of the Holy Trinity. Grace, he said, is not just some holy hypodermic by which our sins are forgiven. Grace is the wonder of life, the giftedness of life that causes us to ask questions that transcend the moment. Isn't that just a great quote? Well, just say yes to get me to go on. Forget I'm an academic community, not a Baptist church. But that quote from what I think is the Lutheran theologian that I so deeply appreciate, Joseph Sidler, that he can bring together the doctrine of the Trinity, grace that we sometimes think we own as Lutherans. You know, we think Luther discovered grace, and Paul said, I think Luther had it right, so he wrote it to the Romans and the Ephesians. That's kind of how we get about grace. And then he linked it to the forgiveness of sins, but then took it to the whole of life and its wonder, and then lands into ask questions that transcend the moment. If I had to give a 1-minute speech for why Lutherans are engaged in the vocation of higher education and its connectedness to our theological self-understanding and this enterprise, it would be right there. And I could probably should sit down and say that's my case. But it's not just about the vocation of this school and the schools like you, but it belongs in the way that faith is nurtured in the home to bring curiosity. You know that the favorite Lutheran question is, what does this mean? And we use it because Luther taught parents to teach their kids to ask upon learning the core of the faith, its applicability to life, their life in the world. What does this mean? And he prompted with some of those questions. When I taught confirmation as a parish pastor, when the students would come in before they were confirmed, I was old-fashioned. They had to have memory work done. They had to have sermon notes. They had to write a statement of faith. And then I asked them to write, what 3 questions are you asking for which you don't yet have answers because you've been engaged in this process of catechesis, and we use that word, for 2 years. And they would sit with their parents. And if they didn't have 3 questions, that was my evaluation of me as a failed instructor, I thought. That became their moment of telling me how I had done. If I hadn't embedded in them a curiosity about faith and life. That's how we sought to teach confirmation, get them in the text and immerse them in the context of the world. I think that's what's going on with experiential learning today. That's why these campuses are such a marvelous intersection of the world and the mind and faith, because students are learning in the classroom and in the world and bringing it back. I'm so envious of that dynamic interplay between experiential learning and the learning of the classroom. I just thought about one sermon note that one of those confirmants wrote. At the bottom he said, Pastor Hanson, I didn't do a very good job on my sermon notes today, but then you didn't do a very good job on the sermon. Next week, let's both try harder. And the best part of that story is I got to preach at his ordination as a pastor. And believe me, that came up at the ordination ceremony. And I said, coming back at you, David. Now you get to give those sermons about which people will take sermon notes. So it's... So every discipline is a manifestation of that curiosity about questions that transcend the moment. I mean, if you're teaching about DNA, you are opening the mind to that wonder, the curiosity of the intricacies of life. If you're teaching about astronomy, you're teaching about the curiosity of the expanse of life. If you're teaching history, you're embedding this lifelong curiosity about the narratives and the events that have led to life as we experience it. If you're teaching art, you're giving a sense of the curiosity of the beauty of life. If you're teaching religion, you're inviting people into the core, the soul of life, lived in community for the life of the world, out of the presence of the holy, as we have come to know incarnate Jesus. What a great enterprise that you're engaged in. A few years ago, in the Church Chronicle of Higher Education, is that what it's called? Yeah. You all are readers after you read the Lutheran? Yeah, good. But I stuck it in the file. Oh, shoot. It's down there someplace. But there was a series of articles about the case for asking life's big questions. And some research was being given and grants were being offered for how campuses were nurturing life's big questions, and some research about how faculty were resistant to creating a teaching environment that fostered life's big questions being asked in the context of whatever the content of that class was. It was an intriguing give and take, but all related, I think, to this case that I think is just easy to make for us Lutherans for why we're engaged in the vocation of higher education, to nurture that unquenchable curiosity about faith and life. Did this just come on?
What?
Did this just come on?
No.
Maybe I just woke up. Yeah, that's good. Always would get up and say, did you hear about the preacher who dreamt he was preaching and woke up and found out he was? So that's, this is Rolf Lund's joke. So a second point here about our vocation and why we're engaged in higher education as Lutherans. Because we are called to the vocation of communities of moral deliberation in a culture of contentious polarization. If it's hard to nurture curiosity about faith and life, it's even harder in this fractious, mean-spirited, contentious, partisan culture to convene people to engage in a communal exercise of moral deliberation. And if we can't teach that, practice that as the vocation of an academic institution, I don't know who can. Now, I think there's resistance to you becoming conveners of the larger community because you know much has been written about the liberal bias of faculties in colleges and higher education in some circles. But both, if we can't find a way to bring the church and the academy together to find ways to create experimental communities of moral deliberation and moral decision making, not just deliberation, but how do we come to decisions? We have a whole task force now looking at how we make decisions around social concerns as a church. We have many ways. Developing social statements is a principal way, but not the only way. We have messages, we have resolutions and memorials at assemblies. I happen to think that the way the ELC has gone about developing social statements has much that is salutary about it. Part of it is the topics come from the people. They come through resolutions from synod assemblies, they come to churchwide assemblies, and a whole deliberative body says, yes, this is a topic that we must go deeply in. So it's democratic in the way that we surface the topics, adopt them, and then participate in them. We are now doing criminal justice, and that will be released the first draft in a week. And the process of getting there is a study that goes out to the church for feedback. It gets revised. Now there'll be a first draft. That'll go out. We'll have hundreds of hearings, or at least 100 hearings all around the country. It will get redrafted. It'll be brought to the next assembly. So we have a very participatory process of engaging the difficult questions of the intersections of faith and life. And what's more timely today than criminal justice? The one we adopted in 2011 is genetics. It really is. Most scientists that read it tell me, I know of no other religious community that has spoken so thoughtfully about the intersection of faith and genetics. And when we had the hearings and the floor debate in Orlando about it, you were there, wasn't it great? I mean, we had their vocation as scientists. We had a woman in the end stages of cancer pleading with us to adopt this statement because it gave a way forward so that others maybe wouldn't have to die as she anticipated she would sue from an incurable disease. It was just a marvelous testimony that we have these 10, 11 social teachings that I think are reflective of a church committed to being a church engaged in public moral deliberation and decision making. Okay, I'm going to go faster because I promised this was Q&A. Okay, it's fine, dear. I don't know what he says this time. Two more quick ones. I think we have a vocation to create communities of trust in a culture of distrust. Martin Marty has written a book. Anybody know the title of this? He turns them out so fast it's probably not his latest one. But he's looking at the intersection of science and religion and how how that engagement can create a culture of trust. And I think we have a particular calling right now. What are the elements of a culture of trust? And I've been working with these thoughts with my colleague Marcus Kunz, who's a theologian on my staff. This is just our own thinking so far. I'm sure others have thought about it. But I think to have a culture of trust that's communal, people must experience 4 elements. Cognitive consonance. There must be continuity between what they've been taught and what's the lived experience of the community. That's where we debate sexuality. That's what gets so tense for people, because they start saying, this isn't what I've been taught. There becomes discontinuity cognitively between the teachings of the church and what they're hearing. But secondly, there must be emotional resonance. There must be something that speaks to the heart. I just read Healing the Heart of Democracy. Who is the Quaker? I just blank on his name. Barbara Palmer. It's a fascinating read. I won't go into it, but you can ask me about it. But it's really read. So this emotional resonance. Then there has to be life-relatedness for people. There has to be some connection between their daily realities in this community for there to be trust. And then there must be personal integrity among the participants and especially the leaders. Well, those are all things that I think an academic community has a calling to help a whole culture struggle with. In a culture of distrust, how do we create communities of trust? And who can do it better than a church engaged in the vocation of higher education? Last one is communities of faith formation and exploration. I saved it till last because you probably thought I was going to start there. But certainly, Lutherans engaged in the vocation of higher education expect that this will be a community that gathers around the means of grace, where the gospel is proclaimed, where Christ is present and present. We explore the sacred texts not only of the Judeo-Christian tradition, but sacred texts of others. In expression of the faith, we engage the faith of others. Who better than an academic community can be a place where the intersections of differing faiths encounter each other? You're doing that here. Almost all of our campuses are. Some of our campuses now have some version of a mosque prayer room for Muslim students. Others, Muhlenberg especially, has found a way to be a community where Jewish students have found a real place. And it's not just we're a place that kind of tolerates diversity. It's a place that goes deep into the richness that comes with diversity as we engage the other. My contention is, when we start exploring our faith in interfaith dialogue, we first all end up better at understanding and expressing our own faith. So the first value is a value to one's own faith, and one's own experience and expression, understanding of the faith. The second value is it leads to appreciation of the faith of the other as a deeply held conviction. The third is there's always a possibility of conversion in those conversations. If you're going into a serious interfaith dialogue, I think you have to go in with the possibility, I may be converted to the faith of the other. And finally, if you stay with it long enough, there will be that moment when you discover that in your differences there is a deeper unity of a shared humanity, a shared creation, a shared vocation to care for the creation that will unleash new possibilities for working together. What a great laboratory. So we face challenges. I'll just remind you of what you already know. Huge financial challenges. Some say the church doesn't commit itself to the college like it used to because there isn't as much subsidy and grants given from national churches and synods to colleges. That's true. I also remind colleges, when you complete a major capital campaign, what was your last one? You went 20 million over, right? What was it called? Your campaign. Now is the time. Now is the time. That preaches. Well, I suspect, what did you achieve for a goal?
The goal was 80 million, and we got 93.
We got 93 million. I would think in that 93 million there are some Lutherans that have contributed. The church has found ways to sustain its colleges. It isn't just the old funnel way of individuals giving. And I understand you have a football name for one who was yet to become a Lutheran, but soon will after I leave town and stop at his house. So always a challenge. It's good. I wasn't supposed to go there, no, he said. We have the challenge of enrollment, because I've always asked if the church is so committed to higher education and its vocation higher education, why is such a small percentage of Lutheran students? It's just a valid question. I don't have the answer. I mean, it has to do with the complexities of local congregations are lifting up our colleges. Literally having 6 kids, our 29-year-old now a month away from finishing college, and I'm with young folks. I know it's also about their just positioning who gives the best package and who meets all their needs. It's a hugely competitive market. But I think it's something that we need to take on together in a more serious way. And I think this is the time to explore new relationships. Your conversations with PLTS, the coming together of Southern Seminary and Lenore Ryan, I think we've just begun to imagine the intersections of our colleges and the rest of the ecology of the church. So that's my last statement. Our self-understanding of the ELCA is we're an ecology of interdependent ecosystems. Higher education, 26 colleges and campus ministries are one ecosystem of this church engaged in education. So too our outdoor ministries and social ministries. 10,000 congregations are an ecosystem within a larger ecology, just like we see the ELCA in the larger ecology of the Church Catholic and global. Now, are there any environmental studies, biology profs here? Good, then I'll tell you what I think I've read, but I'm not sure it's true. That where 2 ecosystems come together, there's an ecotone. That's the arena where 2 ecosystems meet, and it's usually in ecotones that new life forms emerge. And if you think of a system, what happens when it comes alongside of another ecosystem within this ecology? Our congregations, our social ministry organizations, the church-wide expression, synods, advocacy. And the more that come together, the more likelihood that new imaginative ways of being engaged in the world together collaboratively might emerge. And I think that's the kind of era we live in, and that's a benefit of you being part of a diverse, complex, but whole church body like the ELCA. Thanks for listening. Now I'll have your questions. You know, dare ask one, baby. You can ask anything, even if it's not something I talked about. What did you come hoping I'd talk about? Here you go.
Hi. You mentioned visiting different campuses and saying that we need to really go beyond just tolerating diversity. You gave a couple of tangible examples. I'm wondering if you could expand a little bit more on the campuses making a commitment to take diversity to a deeper level.
Right.
What are some of the ways that manifests in terms of policies, structures, institutional changes?
Yeah, and you're asking a level of specificity I just don't have accessibility. The one I've watched closest, not only because I'm in love, but our daughter teaches there in the Lincoln College, and our son goes there, is Augsburg, because it has really taken seriously the opportunity to be in the most racial, ethnically diverse zip code from Chicago to San Francisco. So it's taken seriously its context, which its highest diversity is among Somali Muslims. So it has had to say, how do we engage this community, not only as a laboratory for experiential learning, but how do we become a place where Muslim students are both welcome, engaged, and how do we reframe the way we do education, the support we give, the class program, which is really an embedded way to advocate and walk alongside of folks who are either new to the educational system, new to the culture. I mean, it's a cause for all kinds of changes in the way that education happens in an integrated way. I don't know when it gets down to policies like admissions and the way education happens. But I know from the church standpoint, if we're serious about becoming racially diverse, we absolutely won't get there unless we look in a deep analysis of how power and privilege exists within the system now. You know this, but it's hard to do. As a white male, I can champion the ELCA being racially and ethnically diverse, but if I haven't participated in a beginning of my own introspective analysis of my power and privilege by virtue of being male and white, and a way for us to do it. And I will tell you, we've made many runs at it, but we haven't found a way that leads to transformation in the radical way that I think has to occur. Too many white Lutherans say, we need to become racially, ethnically diverse to preserve our white denomination. We need more people of color to keep doing what we've been doing. Then we deserve to die instead of becoming diverse. Or something, we have something that people of color lack. So we need to give what we have that they lack. No. If we begin with the premise, we are less than the whole, we are less than the community God has created us to be and Christ redeemed us to be, absent the other, that I have a sense of diminished self, both communal self and personal self, absent the presence, the witness, the challenge of the other, then I'm at least beginning to a posture that I think moves us. But then when we get to, but I must confront what was for there to be fully place for the other, then that's where we're having a terrible time. I mean, our next social statement will be on gender injustice, and there's a lot of anxiety in the church that we're going to have to look at issues of patriarchy. We're going to have to look at not only language, but how language shapes faith. And there's some folks saying, can we do this? Are we ready for this after sexuality? Having our youngest daughter, a women's study major, it helps to have 6 young adult kids in a diverse family. That I was telling my students, they just keep me honest. I liked Parker Palmer's book on Healing the Heart of Democracy. I mean, he talks about heart work as the integrating of the holistic self, of head, mind, and heart, and communal. And he says, when our hearts are broken, and we all go through the experience of having our hearts broken, one of 2 things can happen. Your heart can be broken and shattered into a million pieces that leave you cynical, that leave you discouraged, that leave you causing you to even rejoice somehow in seeing your neighbor's heart, or your heart can be broken open towards the neighbor. Theology of the cross kind of thing. Well, our daughter, I was sitting in her living room reading Healing the Heart of Democracy, and she walked by and said, Dad, Healing the Heart of Democracy. And she just went on this riff about democracy is nothing but a veiled protection of historical patriarchal power systems. And she just did a launch, and it was like, there's nothing to be healed, it needs to die, and you be born into something else, Dad. And I was like, okay, sorry, thank you. But we need that kind of challenge. But sometimes I think if you lack confidence in the Spirit's presence, one of the things about being Lutheran for me is we are deeply rooted and constantly being changed. That's what it means to be a reforming movement. But sometimes I think we've lost that confidence, that to be Lutheran is to be deeply rooted and to be constantly being made new. And we're not going to get into these questions if we don't trust that reality. Sorry, I didn't have the specifics, but I gave you a chance to talk.
Really bring it back, those last comments, bring back why do you want to see some coaches or higher institutions. And part of my observation is that even when I meet here as new students, when they first come back in the fall, their comments are, this is a safe place.
That's the parents' comments, it's a safe place.
That none of this goes on here. Students, I can see, want to stretch, grow, learn, experience life, and all that we do offer here that's wonderful. It is a journey of exploration.
Yeah.
But I think, for me, it seems to start at home and what message is given to them when there's no home. And I can see students wanting to pull away from that. We've talked about this in our congregations too.
To me, and I don't want to be critical of congregations, but if congregations aren't communities of what I've described the vocational college to be, then it is the jarring. Then you're into the local parentis debates of my days of being in college. But if these students are formed in the faith of a community that has those characters, I most missed when I became a synod bishop was teaching confirmation. I honestly most missed that. In fact, I made the mistake of saying that to a group of clergy the first week I was a synod bishop, and then the next week, a pastor showed up with a busload of compliments and sent it off and said, if you miss it so much, teach them. And brought them into my office. So, but why? Because I saw confirmation as teaching them the depth of the content of the faith. And Saturday mornings, we would do one Saturday. The third month was a retreat. In the afternoon, we would go into the community to see how that teaching comes into life in the community. So we would teach the first article in the morning, both in the catechism, creation, Genesis, and then we would go to a nature preserve, and we would have a naturalist walk us around for an hour and a half talking about what does it mean in Genesis when God said it was good. It meant it was interconnected, it worked as God intended. It was a sustaining of life. And how is that goodness coming unraveled or being sustained now? And so every part of the catechism had its opening up in the kid's life and world. To me, that's just getting them ready to pass off to an ELCA college or university. I mean, when we studied the second article, I believe in Jesus, we talked about Jesus as God's great intervention for the sake of reconciliation. And we would go to the home of someone who just come out of treatment and experience reconciliation for the sake of healing. And then we would go to somebody who was experiencing death. And one year we took the kids to Lori's home, and this happened to be Advent. She was 11, she'd had cancer for 7 years, she was in home in hospice. Her mom was a single mom. And we talked about Jesus as light in darkness. And the kids made candles, they went to Lori's house, they decorated the tree, they sang Christmas songs, they bore witness to the presence of Christ as light in this darkness. And then the third article, of the resurrection, we would always go to a funeral home, and then we would go to the grave of the most recently deceased person in the congregation. But first we would see the film Phos, which was on Greek Orthodox celebration of Easter, and how the oldest son would come to the cathedral on Easter Eve, and the priest would strike the first light of Easter, announcing the resurrection. The son would light his candle and bring it through the village streets to home, to light the darkened home and announce Christ is risen, Christ is risen indeed. But first stop at the cemetery and light the candle on the graves of the loved ones and say, Christ is risen for you, Grandma, Christ is risen for you, Uncle. And we would see that film, we would take candles, we would go to the grave, we would invite the family, and that year, it was Lori's grave that we had just visited in December. She had been buried the week before. It was January in Minnesota. The mound of dirt was still there. The roses were now frozen. And Lori's mom and grandma joined us. The kids put the candles on Lori's grave. They lit the candle and said, Christ is risen for you, Lori. Christ is risen indeed. They took hands with her mom and grandma and sang, Children of the Heavenly Father, safely in his bosom gathered. They will never forget the intersection of faith and life. When the disciples came down from the Mount of Transfiguration and they heard the Passion Years, they said, what does this resurrection from the dead mean? I think that's a lifelong question that those kids begin to ask in the context of Lori's death and the promise of resurrection. If we can nurture that kind of catechesis in congregations, then we've built a pipeline for you all to take those folks and go deeper and broader into the world. But we've got a lot of work to do. But it's possible. It really is possible. And I think it's our vocation. You're not going to ask questions because you get 20 minutes of answer. Yeah.
a Lutheran education since she got here, and I learned that it was very suited education. And to watch her eyes open every day, to watch her explore and sort of, it's okay, to ask this, it's okay. And she asked, when is Pastor Melissa coming to class? That I promised them that Pastor Melissa will come. And that's Pastor and she's really, I feel, growing in spirit and mind in ways that is amazing. So I'm trying to learn diverse family and dysfunction. Could you tell me what is happening?
You can let me mess with your tradition like you're now messing with ours? No, that's just great.
Can you tell me what's happening at your level with this diversity? Because I feel like it's, from watching her, it's such a rich experience for the student needs.
Yeah. The hardest work I do now is with other Lutherans who do not agree with the ELCA. It's the hardest work I do. In 1 week, Monday to Tuesday, we had our first engagement with the leadership of the North American Lutheran Church that broke off from us over sexuality. I wasn't in the room, but four people. Not easy conversations, got a little bit. The next day, I met with Matt Harrison, the leadership of the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod, which we have historically done twice a year as leaders of the two churches. It began with him declaring, our work with this building is over. And I said, do you work with this building? We have a church that's engaged in the world. I didn't know, but that was naughty of me. But, I mean, think of what this means. We've historically said, we will not let our theological differences with the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod interfere with our capacity to respond to serving the neighbor, which is a core Lutheran understanding of the freedom of the gospel. And now he said, we no longer will do Lutheran World Relief together, we'll no longer do Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Service together, no longer do military chaplains together, and we knew this was coming, as did our partners, so they're posturing, so they will now have memorandum of relationships with both of us. They'll continue their fine work, we'll both support them, but for some reason it can't be as shared ministries of the two churches, which tells you how deep the fissure, the separation is, especially for them. The ELCA's governing documents say, we deem ourselves to be an altar and pulpit fellowship with all other Lutheran church bodies who uphold the unaltered Augsburg Confessions. So our orientation is to a relationship of unity until we have grounds for it not to exist. Their orientation is close communion, lack of connectedness until we are deemed to be worthy of their understanding of those historic confessional documents and teaching. And they have deemed finally our assembly, actually about human sexuality, to kind of be the final word that they do not believe that we are faithful to the confessions. You know, it was interesting because they didn't think we were faithful when we entered into full communion with the three Reformed churches and the Episcopal Church. So they said to us, can you make a confessional case for that? Dr. Tim Weiger, teaches at Philadelphia Seminary, wrote a fine paper of the theological groundings for ecumenical agreements, and to be all honest, they were astounded that we could do it. We asked them for a confessional theological paper of why they judged us to be heterodox Lutherans in 2001, and the whole paper was about the politics of Lutheran Church Missouri Synod that led to that decision in their convention. So we're really struggling now. And fortunately, some things happen locally. My fear is that it becomes a confusing witness on the religious landscape, that Lutherans speak so divergently and differently, but both as Lutherans. I mean, when Matt Harrison was one of the four key religious leaders that testified before Congress in the midst of the contraception HHS controversy, I mean, CNN had a picture for many days with the Catholic bishop, and I can't remember the other two, and he was the head of a Lutheran church. That's all that comes across. So too when I have that kind of exposure for him. We are almost at an impasse. What I said in the time before last, because we have tried up to now to have a day of theological conversations, and now those seem to be over, which is very tragic for me, that we can't even come together to talk about our supposed common theological understandings, though differently interpreted now. I finally said, do you in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod ever ponder the possibility that you have more clarity about the law than Jesus did? And I went to the Gospels where Jesus was saying, yes, this is what the law says about the Sabbath, but I say to you, this is what the law says about killing, but I say to you, that Jesus is always intersecting, not setting aside the law, but binding and loosing the law is what I think Matthew is about, actually, with Mark Powell at Trinity. And then I said to them, do you ever think the clarity with which you proclaim the law precludes people from even coming close to hearing the gospel? That when you have close communion, when you so definitively say this word about gay and lesbian people, that all that's heard is the law that condemns, and people don't get an earshot of hearing the good news of Jesus Christ. So that's the level of honesty that we are going at, but it doesn't lead to any kind of, it's sad. It's really sad. We have much, what? There was a lot of silence. There was some acknowledgement that that's possible. Oh, yeah. Well, you know what saddens me, in addition to, I am tenaciously committed to working for unity within the church till we experience that unity at the table of the Eucharist. I mean, that's a less than ultimate unity, but to me, it is so core to the making visible the unity that's ours. So, I mean, that's why I keep going to Rome with all of our differences, because I'm just going to be engaged, in those theological conversations. What saddens me as a Lutheran is, I think this is a poignant moment in the culture of the world for giving a Lutheran witness to the gospel. That for so many reasons it is a countercultural and liberating word, but it's getting lost in all of these internal conflicts, and not just with Missouri, but in our own congregations and divisions over whether you're staying or not. So it is a really hard time. And so I can see that student eyes just wide, because you're opening something to her. Yeah, it's a hard time.
Related actually to both of these comments, I was intrigued by the idea of people who are looking for a place of safety and balancing that sort of semantically with what you were talking about, creating an environment of trust. Because one of the things that I really feel strongly about in my class is that I want to be about as safe and protected as a candle.
Right.
I don't want them to, but I do want to have an environment of trust in the classroom where we can open those candles and we can deal with what's inside them. And I think that's what's happening with your student, because actually I from teaching in the same department, showing up, he's wonderful. He does create that environment of trust in his classes, so your students are able to do that, able to explore, without feeling like they're going to be left behind or fall into some deep abyss. And I think maybe just a semantic difference, that maybe what we can do is we can reassure the parents that this may not be a safe place for their children, but it will be a place in which their children can place trust in the people that they're journeying with. Right? And so I think maybe that description of trust that you gave us is a really helpful thing.
Yeah, it's just kind of an intellectual work in progress for me. To me, part of the safety trust is if I know that in this community that's going to open me up, your candle metaphor, there will also be a place where faith is nurtured, where faith is expressed communally. So that's why if faith is only explored and not expressed and experienced communally, then it becomes a kind of intellectual, rigorous environment. But that's why I think if we can become increasingly religiously diverse on our campuses, I hope there's a critical mass of Hindu students or Muslim students that they can experience the communal expression of that faith, as well as explore it and be challenged by other folks of other faiths. So, and that's why seeing all these students here at noon, I mean, that's just a delight. I'll tell you what I wanted to do is just have Scott and Melissa bring in some bread and wine and some word, and let's just make this a full experience of our Eucharistic life together. We had pizza, that was close. Because I know that happens in this place. So, because then you've got the dynamic of being Lutherans in higher education.
I'm wondering, Vocation might play into that.
And how,
Vocation.
wow. Tell me what you think.
Well, I heard in one of your comments that the vocation of higher education has to be the people who are there
Right,
and not just preparation
right,
for vocations that
Right.
come afterward. And
right.
I'm wondering how an environment in which there are mutually reinforcing vocations
Yeah.
might change what it means to serve the student.
Wow.
And I was trying to connect that with how you began with all those countercultural movements.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
this
And this feels like a conversation I could learn much more from you than contribute. I do know that my colleagues who are presidents, because I try to go on retreat to Lebanon and just spend time with college and university presidents, really labor over the multiple configurations of self-interest in an academic community and how this community serves the different self-interests. Particularly the president that feels drawn to the regents, to the faculty, to the staff, to the students, to the alum, to the prospective students, all customer groups, and how you create a community where each feels called not only to their own self-interest being served, but to serving the others within the community, not beyond. As the greatest challenge of leading an academic institution today is, your dean, would you think I'm close? I mean, it's interesting in the presidential search processes that are underway, because I usually have a representative on the search committee, and how they report back to me how these self-interests get played out in the search process, particularly as different subgroups evaluate the outgoing president and whether he or she was loyal mostly to the faculty or the alums or the regents. How do we come? So it becomes very difficult to take rich concepts like serving the neighbor, and how does that become a description of the culture of a community like this? How do you think you're doing here? Oh, you're new, right? Oh, yeah. But, you know, we live in a market economy. We live in a market world where we live in a competitive world. We can't be stupid about this. We have customers, and we need to get customers. We need to hold customers. Good faculty are our customers. Great students are our customers. Active giving alums are. When I'm with presidents, I ask things like, what are your discount rates? What's your alumni contribution rate to your annual fund? Those are important things to ask about how we're doing with our principal customers. What's your retention rate? I talked to one college president who said, we are so down to taking care of our customers and marking how we're doing, that now when we have the first fire drill at the residence halls in the fall, we train our RAs that are supposed to go through and make sure everybody's out to note how many of the first year students have already put something on their dorm walls that is a branding of the college, so we begin to see the attachment that's coming to the school. Never miss a moment, huh? I mean, that's just, now I thought, what if there really was a fire? You're going to lose 14 of your RAs because they're writing down 3 pennants, 2 sweatshirts, 4 balloons here. But it tells you, and we have to be in that culture. We as Lutherans cannot mega churches, but we have to learn from mega churches. How did they find a niche? They got a niche in the market. They do it really well. Most of the LCA congregations, if there's a successful mega church in their neighborhood, shouldn't try to emulate it, although most members will say, why can't we be like, Mars Hill Church? But we need to learn, what are they doing that's attracting and holding people? So I think it's easier always to knock things than to learn from what they're doing well and then appropriate it in a way that's faithful to our self-understanding. And I think that's true about who's your biggest competitor for students and faculty?
Depends. we don't big companies in the state at all.
Okay. It's probably not like in the Midwest where you get the ELCA colleges that are working together but also know they're competing, and so how do you live in a world that's collaborative and competitive with the same partners? But isn't that wonderful if we could model it? You're going to have to Glory to ask me a question.
Well, actually, if there's more questions, you should welcome that. But we're mindful that we did say an hour or so for those who need to go. And just like I said, glad you could meet with us so that you could see what faithful work this community
This
is
is
about.
great.
And I'm very grateful that you could be here so that so that we can hear from you too. So thank you.
You're welcome. Now, I want to know how many of you are coming tonight, because I'm still, oh, wow, oh, I gotta go get some new material. I gotta go get some new material quick. I actually didn't